believe in God.
Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
Neil, where have you been? We've missed you. We really have. G'day, and welcome to this episode of An Atheist, a Believer, and a Pastor Walk into a Bar. I'm your host, Peter Rowe. Thanks for your company on this Wednesday night, the 8th of January, 2025. Our very first podcast for this new year, and Happy New Year to you and everyone in your family. I hope you had a terrific time. Now, just gone 8 o'clock, Australian Western Standard Time, broadcasting from Perth, Western Australia, live on YouTube. Would love you to be involved in tonight's episode, which is titled When Religion Gets in the Way of Common Sense. I'm just going to quickly check and make sure that my mute button, which was a habitual thing happening last year, is still on, and it is. That's absolutely fantastic. When religion gets in the way of common sense, the idea came up to me in a conversation with a friend who went to an outside Catholic wedding by a priest who was a priest for some 30 years, who confessed in all that he had ever done, he never, ever married anyone outside of the four walls of his church. I kid you not. That in itself isn't too crazy, but the reason sure is. The Catholic Church officially discourages weddings outside of a church building because it can detract from the sacredness of the occasion. However, a bishop may permit a wedding in a building or outdoor location that respects the dignity of the occasion for special reasons. They say they discourage. Well, it's actually banned, outlawed, as it were, except for rare occasions when the bishop can step in. We're going to find out what some of those reasons might be. The dignity of the occasion, interesting. So the Catholic Church considers a building built by people who may not have even been believers when they built the building and in believing in God. They consider that more sacred than in a beautiful garden that they believe was created by God. What you talk about, Willis? There you go on to say the ideal place for the celebration of marriage is in a church, as it fits the solemnity of the occasion and emphasizes marriage as a sacrament and a union before God. For Catholics, marriage is not just a social and family event, but an event of significance for the Christian community, which witnesses and welcomes this new domestic church, in brackets, the family. For this reason, the church prefers that marriage between baptized people be celebrated in a parish church. As I mentioned, marriage in places like gardens and beaches is outlawed by the church because such celebrations can detract from the sacredness of the occasion. Special reasons could include marriages between a Catholic and a Muslim, for instance, or someone with no religious background. However, permission will not normally be given for a Catholic marriage to be conducted in novelty locations. Novelty. I don't think we're talking about getting married in a circus or whatever, but novelty locations. So you can get married inside a Catholic church if neither of you believe in God, but you can't get married outside of the building if you do believe in God. Now, I was always taught God is omnipotent and omnipresent, all-powerful and everywhere, except down the beach, apparently. Look, maybe God just doesn't like beaches, I don't know. Or parks, for that matter. Some of those waterfalls I've seen, they're just absolute evil. Just when I thought I'd heard all of the ridiculous man-made rules and laws from the Vatican, rather, this little sucker comes along. I love it. Mind you, for a religion that teaches from an ancient book, whose writers knew nothing about the world in which they lived, including medicine and cosmology, I guess we shouldn't be surprised. They also consider abortion to be a mortal sin and considers homosexual activity a moral evil and an objective disorder. It is written, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have any gods before me. This commandment forbids idolatry, the worship of false gods and goddesses, and it excludes polytheism, the belief in many gods, insisting instead of monotheism, the belief in one God. Maybe our listeners can explain to us why praying to Mary and Joseph is so popular these days, none of which are considered gods or goddesses. So let's open up this line for discussion with our light version of our regular panel, with Luke away with the fam, and Suresh is playing taxi driver tonight. That leaves us with Rich and Jace, which equals 2 non-believers and a believer. I'll leave it up to you to work out which is which. Welcome, gents.
You'd think the pretty one is the believer.
Oh, Jace.
Believe in what?
Doesn't clear it up much, does it?
No, look, this is an interesting one because we can go deep, very deep, talking about, the things that can happen if the Catholic Church didn't get in the way, rather, like stem cell research and stuff like that. Or we can just talk about the not the fluffy side of it, but certainly not being able to get married outside of the 4 walls of a church just seems rather bizarre, does it not, gents?
I do. I find that particularly bizarre. But, I'm not a Catholic, so I don't have their whole framework that they sort of see the world through. But it's funny that you mentioned this particular one because I'm actually listening to an audiobook by a Catholic priest. His name's Father Richard Raw.
Raw.
Yeah, R-O-H-R, Richard Raw.
Raw.
Franciscan monk, Franciscan friar. I think that's what they call them, friars. But anyway, he's a Catholic. But he said something in his book a couple of days before Rowie brought up this subject, and he says, in the catechism that they have to learn about all the doctrines and dogmas of the church, he said one of the very first ones that I was ever taught is they ask you the question, where is God? And the answer is God is everywhere. And then he says, then they spend the next 50 years of his life trying to explain to him why that's not actually the case. He's only in the church, and he's only in the bread and the wine, and he's only over here, and he's only in the priest, and he's only in the Catholic, and he's like, well, we started pretty good, but the other stuff doesn't sort of go so good after that. And that's a leader in the Catholic Church, sort of poking holes in his own sort of framework. So I thought that was quite fascinating.
What's really strange about that too, Rich, is the word Catholic actually means universal. So the sky is universal, wind is universal. They're all Catholic. You can say the sky is Catholic. You can say trees are Catholic. The oceans are Catholic. It says universal. There's a clue, I would have thought, in being able to open the doors and be able to be exposed to the beauty that they claim was created by God. It's crazy. Jace,
well,
what say you?
Mate, there's clearly some places that God can't peer into, because the bottom line for me, Pete, is if I can't get married in Las Vegas by an Elvis impersonator, I don't want to get married.
We actually know some people that Lou works with who are about to do that. They've been together for about 40 years. They're going to Las Vegas to get
brilliant.
I want the beginning of my vows to be, I'm a hunker burning love. Seriously, that if we think about, I know we've redefined marriage over the years, but if we really think about what marriage is, and from the viewpoint of an atheist there, I've laid it on the line. From the viewpoint of someone who's an atheist, I still want to spend the rest of my life with my bride. Religion doesn't come into it for me. So how I choose to get married really should be between me and, well, actually, no, I'll take that back. That's her decision how we're going to get married. I don't have a lot of say in it, but I'll tag along because there's a lot of benefits.
Well, strangely, Richard, you'd know more about this from a biblical perspective. Marriage is not a biblical Christian thing anyway.
No, it's funny when you hear, especially not so much from the Catholic Church as much as like the evangelical church, our backgrounds. This whole sort of concept of biblical marriage is not a thing. It's a thing if you don't actually read the Bible, because when you go and read the Bible, it's a very different kind of thing. And it's funny because in the Old Testament, most of what is called marriage is really about securing, a woman as your property as a man, and it really the I'm trying not to be too crude, and the act of securing her is sex, and that's as biblical as marriage gets in most of the Old Testament. When you get to the New Testament, most of what you hear about is the Apostle Paul saying it's much better if you don't actually get married.
But wasn't it a part of British law until very, very recently that a woman is considered a chattel, like property of the male?
I wouldn't be surprised. So that, if you're going to go for biblical marriage as a thing, you're talking about women as property, and that most of all of that in the Old Testament is written that way, which goes back to Rowi's intro. Clearly written by a people in a time that is vastly different from us. And so even though our translation may use the word marriage, they're not the same thing. It'd be much better if we used a different word just to save confusion.
Well, if we define it by their value, Rich, we got to think about what they're worth. I mean, 4 camels, a pig, and that. So if we think about a woman's worth in terms of what they're, the farm animals that we can exchange them for, that's some women are worth a lot more than others.
That's biblical.
I'm going to cop it. I'm sorry. I apologize.
But actually,
not just from our listeners and viewers.
That's right. But I was during the gay marriage plebiscite that was in Australia. I did hear some interesting things from I guess a more progressive Catholic bishop. I can't remember who was, but he was basically saying, from a Catholic perspective, whatever the government deems marriage has no bearing on what the church calls marriage. They're actually 2 completely separate things. And so he said, he's got no skin in the game. If the government wants to pass a law that says their thing called marriage includes those people, that's fine, because they have something completely different. Theirs is a sacrament. Theirs is a religious thing that's got a slight overlap because it's the same 2 people getting married in the church and getting married in the government, but they're 2 different things, achieving 2 different ends. And I guess that sort of makes sense in their world about why you can't, as Catholics, get married outside the church, because then it's the sacramental, sacred act that's happening where a whole bunch of stuff.
Was it the church that really kicked up about that, though, Rich? Was it the churches that really kicked up about it, or was it just Sky News?
Oh, no. Certain segments of the Catholic Church would have. I had closer ties with the sort of evangelical, Pentecostal kind of churches here. That's most of where my sort of church acquaintances are a part of, and they were hell for leather against it, like the world was going to end. Apparently,
is that because the argument is that it should be about procreation?
I saw them throw everything at it about procreation, which that argument has a fatal flaw, because then why are you married if you're sterile? Marriage isn't for you, and you should not be allowed to get married for the very same reason. Or if you don't want to have kids, or you're using birth control and all that sort of stuff that evangelical don't traditionally believe, and I think Catholics traditionally do, because they closely align marriage and procreation. But the rest of them, I'm going to get in trouble depending on who listens to this episode.
Bit late for that.
My very considered opinion, because I was on the inside, I was actually attending a very large, influential Pentecostal church at the time. From what I heard, and the arguments they gave, and more importantly, the way they spoke about that particular issue, it was just downright homophobic bigotry from the leadership. The average Joe, they had a few different ideas, but That's pretty much the ones that were very vocal were just bigots. I can't say it any other way. And that's not just me looking from the outside. I was sitting in the pews listening to their.
But where does this come from, Rich? Where does it come from? When the bottom line is, no one's saying, they're homosexual and they're requiring you to be homosexual. There's none of that. I mean, they happen to be homosexual. You happen to be heterosexual. No one's trying to make you change teams. So I don't understand where the angst comes from.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because, back to the Catholic thing. And this is where there was a question. Somebody asked the Catholic bishop this, and he said, it's got nothing to do with me because the government can't pass a law about church marriage. So he says, I don't have any skin in the game. Like, we do our marriage. For some reason, the evangelical church, because they're not sacramental, they only have one marriage, which is the government thing. And so they're all angsty about that. But as you said correctly, so this is where the topic about getting in the way of common sense. Common sense says there's an institution called marriage, which we all sort of participate in. But I don't I'm not married to everybody in the world. I'm married to one person, and your marriage has no impact on my marriage. So, my favorite quote from that whole time was, what was that that nutty Queensland senator, when he's asked about it, I wish I'd
run.
But he's been interviewed and asked.
Not farmer mate with the hat.
No, it was the other one. He's an older one. It will come back to me. But he basically asked, the reporter asked him, so what do you think about the marriage plebiscite? He's like, as far as I'm concerned, just let 1,000 blossoms bloom. As far as love is love. And then he says, but I'm not talking about that, because every 5 months a person's torn to shreds by a crocodile here in far north Queensland. And I was like,
that's the guy I'm talking about. What's his name? He's last
Bob Catter.
Yeah, Bob Catter. That's
Catter.
Hilarious.
So I think he had, he had the quote of that whole season, which is like, just let love blossom. Yeah. There's more important things for him. It was the Crocs. There's more important things going on than
nothing more important than the Crocs in Queensland. what I find fascinating in all of this, and Jay said, what's the problem? Why do people love getting up in arms? I mean, we've seen since the beginning of time that people just love having a go at anyone who's different.
We need an enemy.
Yes, correct. The tolerance level for most human beings is incredibly low. You've only got to drive on the road and see that most people want to kill you and want to inflict damage on your vehicle just because you might have made a small mistake. What I want to go back to, we know that the Pope is the ultimate. He's the man. He's the controller. Has the final word on most issues that may be contentious. But where does the bishop come in on this? The being able to override the rule for a special occasion that somebody can get married. And as I said, this was on last weekend or the weekend before, that a couple that Lou knows, that the priest said, you know what, this is the first time I've ever been outside of the walls and conducted a marriage. In 30 years, never ever has it happened. So either he just followed the rule and towed the line, or there was never a good reason. But he can go back to the bishop, and the bishop can override it and say yes. So I don't understand how that works. Is he getting authority from above? I would imagine the only person higher than a bishop would have to be the Pope, unless there's somebody in between that I don't know about. I'm not, up to the rank and file of Catholic churches. But it just seems a bit strange that there is the bishop can override and say, yeah, go for it. And what does that mean? What if they dare do it? Because the bishop has said, what's actually going to happen in the heavens, in the Vatican, in God's presence, if they actually go and sit by a waterfall and the priest marries them and says the same words, bar in these walls that we are standing, or whatever? What do they expect is going to actually happen? It's just these rules are just crazy. It's like, what's going to happen if stem cell research gets the big tick? And how is it that they manage to have such influence and power in
Sometimes it
issues
just seems like
that are
cruelty, doesn't it?
medical. Sorry?
Just cruelty. It
Of
just
course
sometimes
it
it
is.
just seems like cruelty. Although I do have to say, there was a quote from Pope Francis. It was February 2023. There was an in-flight press conference that he took part in, and he called laws criminalizing homosexuality a sin. In words, this is not right. Persons with homosexual tendencies are children of God. God loves them. God accompanies them. Condemning a person like this is a sin. Criminalizing people with homosexual tendencies is an injustice. And then he was asked to clarify it by a Jesuit priest. And he replied in a letter that every sexual act outside of marriage is a sin, but criminalization is neither good nor just. And I will tell whoever wants to criminalize homosexuality that they are wrong. Now, how's that coming from the Pope?
Yeah,
You know, that is going to upset a lot of Catholics around the world.
Oh yeah.
absolutely. When did he say that? 2023.
February 2023, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. It's interesting. On one hand, he's saying it is a sin, which he must stand by, obviously, for reasons. But to say it's not a criminal offence is, hello, that's absolutely spot on. Why should it be? And it wasn't that long ago that it was.
This whole acceptance thing, turning the other cheek, and empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question.
So I think that's a huge leap forward for the Catholic Church, that Pope in particular. And I imagine his hands are tied being in that position because of all the beliefs that surround it. But, surely the same logic that says criminalizing, which is about injustice, which is about exclusion and punishment. What if you're a Catholic and you're excluded from a whole range of sacraments and participation in the church that is supposed to be your mother? Surely that's just as unjust and punishing as any state-sponsored law could be. I don't see how the logic changes just because the church has passed their laws and the government has passed the exact same kinds of laws. How can one be just and one not be? That's where the common sense breaks down for me. So maybe the next pope is probably going to be a reaction against this one. Maybe the one after.
Yeah.
Well, as far as popes go, they have gradually changed lots of things. I remember, I can't remember how long ago it was, but the purgatory and the babies in waiting. I can't remember what they called that particular law or rule, but that was chucked out. So it was okay to put people through such a nightmare belief that their children may not go to heaven. They're going to be held over, for people ruining their lives about that. And then the Pope says, no, that one's out. That's gone. Tick, gone. I wish they'd do the same with condoms, because that to me is based on the scripture about spilling the seed on the ground. And
again, it's complete study, a complete case study in missing the point of the actual scripture.
Yeah.
Which was the whole point of it is you better take care of your family.
Yeah.
And he was like, nah, I just want to use them for pleasure and then not actually give them the value of my pleasure to them, because having a child was the way you secured your position in the family. And so the male was just using the woman for pleasure, pulling out early so that he wouldn't have to give his inheritance to her. Yeah. It was about abuse and stuff. It's got nothing to do with birth control whatsoever. And it turns a thing that is for women, for justice, for family, for taking care of the people in a slightly better way, and actually turns it on its head and doubles down on the injustice. It's just insane.
And the cost has been millions of people. You've only got to look at a place like Uganda, or my goodness, the amount of people who were forbidden to wear a condom, which is far more evil than it is to allow someone to die. I mean, how is that even an argument?
Well,
And
I mean,
and how stupid are the people who decided to obey such a ridiculous law and rule, as if anything was going to happen to them if they disobeyed and wore a condom and lived?
But it makes complete sense, Pete. If you think about it from the other perspective, what better way to grow your church than to give birth to more Catholics?
It's true.
Yeah.
Being a culture, Catholicism is very much a belief system and a culture in one. And yeah, it's a big thing, isn't it?
Oh, look, I know many Catholics who have, pictures of the Pope on the wall and, the standard obligatory Jesus on the cross. But try getting into talking to a family member or whatever about Catholicism and just see how far you get. They are just absolutely it's incredible. And on that note, if you are a Catholic and your blood is boiling from what we are saying, that's fine, because these are our opinions and our thoughts and feelings, and you are more than welcome to share yours. If we say something that you think is incorrect or you don't believe it's right and you know more about it, but being a Catholic, what's your experience being in the Catholic Church? Jump on YouTube, which is where you're watching us live right now, and you'll see a window down the right-hand side where you can jump on and put in a comment. Love to hear what you have to say. It doesn't have to be about Catholicism. That's just the subject that we've chosen for tonight because it's interesting. It's something that happened from experience for myself. I had no idea that Catholic priests were forbidden from holding marriages outside of the four walls of a church. So tell us your experiences. Love to hear from you. Be a part of what we're doing. We're on air. We've been going for about half an hour, so we've got another about an hour to go before we generally wrap it up. But please let us know what you think about Catholicism. It's a subject that I don't think you could ever exhaust. It is so complex and so strange to many people like myself, coming from an evangelical Christian background, Pentecostal, born and bred. Yuck.
Pete,
Yes.
today's subject is when religion gets in the way of common sense. Let me read you something which was probably a bit of a turning point in my ability to accept certain religions. On March 31st, 2013, Christians all over the world will take to the streets in their automobiles. Relying only on the divine protection of Jesus Christ, they will prove that the Savior of man will not abandon them when they remove their hands from the steering wheels of their cars for a total of 5 minutes. They will not be at a red light or a stop sign. They will be on the highways. This is true faith. Jesus Christ does not abandon his children. And with the current state of the world, it's time to show Jesus that we have not abandoned him. Do not come to this page telling us that we are crazy and that we're going to die. Jesus is our shepherd and he will tend to his flock. Please join us and show that you are not afraid to place your life in the hands of Jesus Christ. Jesus, take the wheel day.
Yep, but a lot of people did that too with with COVID, particularly in the United States, who refused to be vaccinated, went to church, mingled among fellow COVID
That's
people,
right.
and just so many
I
of them
remember.
died.
So many churches lost so many members and so many leaders of the church as well.
Yep. Hence the saying, blind faith. That is literally believing that something will happen, having never experienced Jesus doing anything like that before in your life.
Yeah, but they must have been sinners, people. Those ones were sinners. The ones that died, they were the sinners.
The backsliders. That's what they will be labeled as, the wicked ones. But yeah, it's extraordinary. One of the other things I wanted to talk about tonight while we're waiting for some people to jump on and have a yarn with us, I sent through on our Facebook page about a woman. I don't know if you saw, talking to Charlie Pickering about. She's a philosopher. She's a professor. She loves the Bible to bits. She's an atheist, but she just loves how the history. And she talks about the inaccuracies. I don't know if you saw it, Rich, that I sent through. Did you have a look at that at all?
I didn't get a chance to watch that one through.
Oh, look, she's just a very, very clever woman. Doesn't bag out stuff other than saying most of the people written about in the Bible don't actually and didn't exist, and then showed why she thought that was true and stuff. And one of the things she said about the God of the Old Testament, which I found really interesting, is that he was visible in so many stories about God actually being there with Moses and David and stuff, and then disappeared in the New Testament. She said, she was asked by Charlie, what would you get rid of in the Bible? She said, the whole of the New Testament. The Old Testament is a horrific story, but there's also lots of historical stuff and evidence on how we developed as a species, including saying that the
there's
one
no
thing
Jesus in the Old Testament.
No.
Which is all right if you're an atheist.
Yeah.
As she is.
Well, it's confusing as a Christian when I was going down that path, because people love to completely separate the Old Testament God and the New Testament God, indicating that perhaps that he or she had changed into a different person. And of course, the person of Jesus responsible for that, as it were. But what I find interesting about the Old Testament that she was talking about is just that God was there. We must remember that everything that was written in the Old Testament and the New Testament was not written by God. These are men's interpretations of understandings of what was happening at that time, and they wrote about it with very little knowledge of the earth they lived in. It was an isolated area. It was small. It wasn't the whole world. It was a tiny little place, and they wrote as best as they knew then. What still concerns me, and Rich and I and Luke have talked about this for ages, I still don't understand how that can possibly be generated into an understanding in 2025. And I think the Catholic Church is one of those reasons why it's just being held back with their dogmas, with their laws, with their, interfering with what's going on in the world, with stem cell research and stopping assisted dying laws from being pushed through government. We've managed to overcome that in most of states in Australia. Not all, but it's still, it's not universal, far from it.
Do they realize, though, that that's why they're becoming more and more irrelevant and why the church is shrinking so rapidly? It's because they're just not keeping up with current morals, current values, current understandings, even science to an extent.
I admire that, though, Jace, to be honest, because...
What, being a stick in the mud?
No. You have to stand by your principles. And if you're just willing to just be washed over and then change it to fit in with the modern world, which they consider to be less caring. I'm not suggesting
the hallmark of a wise person is being willing to change your opinion based on new evidence.
Yeah, that's what science does. Religion doesn't do that. Religion says this is what we know, this is the deal, and this is where it stays and remains, and God is this and God is that. Science says we don't have those answers and we're willing to move. That's the difference, I think, the fundamental difference between faith or believing in something with a lack of evidence as opposed to something which is only based upon evidence. Otherwise, it is changed. There's no development in religion, I don't think, personally.
But then faith tells us that snakes can talk. You got to draw the line somewhere, because it kind of infantilizes adults by making them try to believe fairy tales.
Well, the problem with that, Jace, is that most people back in the day didn't think that they were fairy tales at all. They actually thought there are millions of people around the world who still think that every word of the Bible should be taken literally and is true. It's the word of God, and there you go. And I'm not changing for anything. And so many people on the other side of going, well, we know that most of it is stories. We understand what the stories meant, and it's an educational part of the Bible to understand things that doesn't have to be based upon fact. Rich, steam coming out of your ears, or is it?
No, because I agree with that second version of it. It's funny, because one of the big differences between like the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church or the Reformation, they had this catch cry, the sola scriptura, which was the Bible alone. So, the Catholic and the Orthodox churches, they don't believe that their faith rests only on the Bible. They say they've got the Bible, but they've got a deposit of received wisdom around that has authority. And so they tend to be less biblicist, like literal, take the stories literally. Because when for instance, if you read Genesis and you're going to take it all literalistically, you end up with a talking snake. It's like, all right, so what? If you read it as a rich myth that might point to something deeper, you end up with something far better.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
you end up with truth instead of some.
So you get that chink in the armor where you talk about a talking snake, and it starts to give you start to harbor some doubt. Whereas, yes, if you treat it as a rich myth with a parable or an analogy of some description, there's absolutely lessons to be learned, and I can live with that, but I can't live with a talking snake.
Yeah, me too. So that's funny because in this forum, I'm the believer. In other forums, I might actually probably be rightly termed an atheist for their belief structure. So it's a weird thing.
What I find interesting, Rich, is what the Bible doesn't do is it doesn't explain why and how the snake is actually talking. What was the purpose of the message that the snake, the serpent, which my understanding was that's Lucifer, the prince or whatever the title was, or whatever, was loved by God and Lucifer cast down to earth as a serpent. If I got that straight of my Pentecostal days.
It's interesting because if we look at the Old Testament as like the Jewish scriptures, during the time that was written, they wouldn't have associated the snake with Satan or a Lucifer character. In fact, the scholarship tends to show that they didn't actually see the enemy as like the sort of modern Christians do, as a character that was against God. That character was just a part of the courts of heaven. There's the big God with his gods under him, and one of them was this guy called the adversary, who would sort of play devil's advocate and do some stuff there, but they're all in this thing. So that's sort of how they saw it. This idea that the snake was Satan, which is this sort of character battling against God, actually came, I believe, in the in-between bit between when the Old Testament was sort of closed and just before the New Testament and the whole times of Jesus came. There's this real radical development of doctrine and stories. They call it apocalyptic kind of faith, which was not like end of the world faith, but more like this idea that there is the world that we see, and behind the scenes is this mysterious other story, and the apocalypse is like the unveiling of this hidden story. And then they had story, that's when they came up with the ideas of demonology really came along, and Satan and a whole bunch of stuff, and that sort of carried over into Christianity. But it wasn't even in the minds of the people writing about the snake. So the snake never was Satan. And one of the scholars that I love to listen to, David Bentley Hart, he has a humorous way of actually talking about that particular story. So if you literally forget everything you know about anything and you just read the story of the garden, you come up with a very different conclusion. You come up with something like there was a bunch of gods. They had a garden. They didn't want to do the gardening, so they're like, "Oh, we need to create some people to tend the garden." Okay,
that's right.
Let's get servants in to tend the garden. We better not let them get too smart because they'll figure out they're our slaves. Not a good deal. So we'll keep them dumb. Don't eat of the free tree of the knowledge of good and evil because you become like us, rebel, then we'll lose our gardeners. The snake is actually the good guy in the story. He's like, those God guys, they're lying to you. If you eat that fruit, you won't die. In fact, when you read the story, they ate the fruit, they didn't die. So the story in itself is a very different thing, but it sits in like the Jewish scriptures as a different thing. And then you sit it in the Christian scriptures and it becomes something even different. Itself doesn't mean too much unless it sits in the sort of interpretive tradition of a community that wraps all these stories in different things. And I think some of them are fascinating. I think many of the things that all of us rail against is that
when did it become binary?
Control and dominance and fear and keeping order rather than something that brings life. And I think that's where it really becomes something terrible.
That whole adversarial, almost equal good and evil. They're fighting a battle that is almost an equal battle, a binary opposition with very little nuance, gray area in between. You're either good or you're evil. When did that come about?
I think from what I understand, it really did start in what they call the Second Temple Judaism. So that's like the Bible times, the Old Testament is like First Temple. That's when the First Temple got destroyed, and then they built a Second Temple toward the end of the Old Testament. And then there's a great deal of flourishing of theological thought. It was during that time that a lot of that kind of thinking came in. And even today, there's traditions of Christianity and faith in that sort of realm where that sort of dual battle of good and evil is very much there. But to me, that's more like the realm of a Stephen King novel. It's great. It's great literature, but I think the best philosophical discussions around it have to conclude that there's no real evidence of these two equal beings battling it out. If anything is true, it can't be that. It has to be something else. There's no evidence of that. So, it's got to evolve.
Let's jump on to a couple of comments from Fenton. Mate, great to have you back. 2025, always a welcome contributor to this podcast. I hope you had a terrific Christmas. Back on those piles again, mate, working, but great to hear you're with us again with some great comments. I definitely think that analysis of gods will get in the way of efficient moral calculation. I used to spend nearly all day searching for God's will. Can you elaborate on that, searching all day for God's will? And what do you mean exactly by that? What were you looking for? As if you could see a manifestation perhaps of God's will in your life. I don't know, but that's an interesting one. And also you followed it up with, I agree, Rich, has Satan, the has is not meant to be there. Satan was actually an interesting concept. Sorry?
I was going to say the name Has-Satan is the actual name that we call Satan and stuff.
I thought it was a typo.
It just basically means the Satan or the adversary. Right, so it used to be like a title of one of the gods in the panoply of God's court, and there became an actual character called Satan. So it was never really. It was like the president is a role, but now imagine there was something called the president who was this being running around, sort of trying to boss you around. That's sort of how it became.
Two things I want to run past you based upon what you're saying, because I found it really interesting. Do you think that the writings of Genesis in particular hasn't done God any favors as far as our understanding about what you see God as being now? And the follow-up to that question is, why did God choose that time and that place in history to do what he did as far as what happened in the Old Testament? Is there any indication to anyone that you know of, post or pre-Bible, why God chose that particular time? Or is it God didn't choose anything, just a bunch of guys decided to start writing about what they thought God was and created the character of God? In other words, if God waited until now to write a book it would make a hell of a lot more sense than the one that they currently got. I mean, you cannot piece it together as if it was written in a certain period of time. You know, there's hundreds of years between stories and hearsays and he said, she said, they said, whatever.
Yeah.
I
I agree 100%. If we let's pretend altogether that, you know, we all agree, yeah, God wrote this thing somehow or wanted it written, the Bible. If that's true, if he was, or they or she, whatever you want to call God, if they were interested in an actual sort of historical, factual account of everything, that would have been much better to do it nowadays, because, you know, Jesus wouldn't have been running around the hillside with people writing stories 100 years afterwards. They would have had their phones out and there would be 10 million videos of every angle of his teaching. So if that was important, he would have waited until now, showing up. So speaking to a bunch of Christians, I would say, well, clearly that wasn't the priority. The priority wasn't some sort of factual history accounting to get it all right, and so we can all believe the right things about God. But maybe the only way I can see the Bible functioning in any good way is it has to be it has to reveal a few things. It has to reveal God in some way, but it has to reveal him in, you know, God in some way that causes us to change. And if it's just a bunch of facts don't change us. It's how we wrestle with it, how we sort of wrestle with the story and see ourselves as responding to certain truths. And, you know, then story becomes more important than some factual history. As far as the, you know, has Genesis done any favors for the, you know, the church in America and therefore Australia since the 1950s? It's actually the church has done no favors using Genesis the way that they've used it. We've got to be quite clear when you read Genesis, the first chapter and a bit is one story of creation. And then it goes to a completely different story of creation that doesn't match. Like,
No.
There's no way of making them the same. There's actual bald-faced contradictions that says something happened on this day, and the next account goes, no, it didn't happen on that day. It happened on this day instead. There's no way of matching them up. So the editors who are putting together Genesis, you know,
trying to make sense of it
3,500 years ago, didn't see an issue with it. Otherwise, they would have pulled one out or changed it to match it up. So they weren't interested in getting their story straight. They were like, hey, there's this one sort of tradition of creation, and here's another one.
Yeah.
Let's not choose. Let's let them both speak different things to us, and we'll wrestle with it, because it's more important we wrestle with it than get our story straight. And then, you know, the 1950s, you know, Western church has been like trying to get the story straight. And it's like, well, you're using the wrong Bible, then just write a new one, because the old one can't work that way.
I mean, I look at Genesis 1, and we hear God say several times that his creation was good.
Mm-hmm.
But how is it possible for a good God to create the animal kingdom, millions of various creatures, most of whom have got to kill each other and eat each other in order to survive and in order to stay alive? These are innocent animals who must live in constant fear and then die a horrible, painful death, whether by disease or starvation, drought, or being torn apart piece by piece while being eaten alive, unless, of course, they're killed and eaten by humans first. I fail to see the natural justice in a system like that. How can you call that good? I mean, 1 Kings 8:63. If I recall rightly, something about 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep
That's right.
As a sacrifice to God. So they're not even being sacrificed for food. It's a sacrifice of the lives of those innocent animals for God. And that's when I've got to start asking these questions about how is torment and torture and horror and pain something that a good God would want?
This is my point. This is my point from earlier on, which really to clarify or not. All of the bad stuff in the Old Testament is men writing, not God. God's not saying, here's the deal. Here, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. Oxen, don't worry about that. I'll take care of it. It's all, this is good. It's good. It's good. But there was none of that. It was just, the claim is, if you read the Old Testament, that God appeared to many people over time. Moses take the 10 tablets, they'll come in handy later on, stuff like that. So there's an interaction between God and the people in the Old Testament. But if that's not true, then God hasn't had anything to do with all of these crazy laws and rules and slavery and murder and all of this horrible stuff that you read through Leviticus and other chapters. So it totally confuses me, because you can't say this is exactly what happened because that's what the men wrote, or this happened because this is what God told them that I'm like, and so write about me. Here's my story. You write about it, tell everyone what I'm really like. I find that all just so
none of it can work.
confusing.
Yeah, none of it can work.
No.
That
And
way.
why did he appear to all of them, but not to any of us more recently?
Well, this is the argument. When Jesus arrived, God disappeared, and he's made no contact with Earth ever since. What the hell? Why?
Yeah. No, I think Jace made a perfect point. You don't have to leave the first few verses of the Bible before you hit some pretty showstoppers in the way that many folk Christians use the Bible. I think, Jace, there's no real way to get around it if you're using your brain. You either have to go, check your brain at the door, and then you're fine, because you don't have to think about it. You just have to perform the words and say, I believe it, and block your brain and then ignore it for most of your life. That's how.
Then why did God give us a brain?
The only other way, I think, if you're going to engage your brain, you either have to say, if you're going to dig your claws into this view of the Bible as some sort of oracle from heaven, you have to say, good isn't good. We call things good, but that's not really good. We have to call, what we call good, like not killing, not dying, not suffering, is actually bad. We have to call good bad, bad good. And then if you start to do that, if you start to say that the very words we're using to describe things mean nothing, all of our talk about theology is nothing but babble. We might as well just be going, there's as much meaning in that sound as in saying good is bad. The other way is, maybe, you have to do something else with that thing. One of the early interpreters of the scriptures, Christian interpreters within the first few hundred years of the church, he went and said, actually, obviously what he's describing isn't creation. It's not good. There's suffering, there's evil, there's gap. So that first account of creation is a mythical description of the end point of creation, not what we have now. What we are here is being created, and one day when it is all good, that's creation. And so there's a strong tradition of Christianity that says what we are part of now, if we're talking about creation, is we're not yet created, we're not yet human, we're not yet, because Genesis 1 described a place that is good and peaceful and full of the presence of God. And you look around, you go, there's none of that going on around here. So the conclusion is we're not yet created. So there's ways that Christians have wrestled with it in really creative ways that way. And if I'm going to choose one way, and I see the crazy Southern Bible thumper talking about how, everything was good and we stuffed it up, and don't worry about that. Animals killing each other and dying for millions of years is good. I think I'll choose the crazy, we're not yet created version over that. if I'm going to stick to anything. You know what I mean?
Richard, a question for you as a bit of a biblical scholar. Lot, was he considered to be a good man?
A rich man?
I don't know. I don't know about the Bible story because he's very ambiguous, isn't he?
Yeah, very.
Oh, very. Because the example I wanted to use was Genesis 19:8, where Lot offers his 2 daughters to a group of sex-seeking men to do with them whatever they wished. And later, he goes on to impregnate both of his own daughters. But the Bible, of course, blames the girls for that and accuses them of conspiring to get their father drunk so that they could rape him so that they could become pregnant. And
that surely has to be...
Because in the New Testament,
fantasy
Peter
novel.
2 Peter 2:7 goes on to say that he, their father, was righteous. And I struggle with all of this because I sincerely do my very best to look at the Bible and try to understand it from the perspective of believers and genuinely try to give it the credit of why the faithful believe in it. And when I read stories like that and the hypocrisy of it and at the end of the day, the filth of it, it's pornographic. And I don't understand why they want this in schools for the kids to read.
Exactly.
That's why it's completely...
The reality of it is that there is horror and torture and incest and none of the stuff that we want people to practice today or ever, for that matter.
It's a fantasy novel written by men that should be banned in most schools. It's not suitable. During the 90s, or maybe even late 80s and early 90s, they released the Good News Bible, Jace, which is not... It is. It's only the New Testament. The old, and they're pretty writing on the front. Yep, and it was just the New Testament. The Old Testament was gone. This is the Good News Bible, insinuating, of course, at the first part. Look, you put that together, packaged it absolutely beautifully. The horror, and the disgusting. It's insane that anyone can somehow try and defend what is clearly a bunch of men writing for whatever purpose to just portray what it is that they wanted to happen. Mankind has been like that since the very beginning. The Old Testament is no different. And I'm sure if there is a God, he's sitting up there going, hang on a minute, I didn't write this. This is not what I'll show you what I'm really like when we finally get around to this New Testament thing. You'll see that I'm not the creep that you are painting. It's insane. It is a book of absolute horror and terror and the most disgusting things that human beings are literally claim to be ordained to doing under God's
word. It's worse. Deuteronomy actually... It's approved by rape and kidnapping are approved by the Bible.
Yeah.
And I just, the more I work my way through the Bible, the more horrified I become about what we're expected to learn from all of this. I have to admit, though, I stayed at the motel once up in Kununurra, and there was a Good News Bible in the drawer next to the bed. And I had a bit of a flick through that. And I got to tell you, it's a very different story to what I read in the King James Bible. Very different.
It's very true, Jace.
But I mean, it is absolutely crazy, and I think that you should be horrified by reading it. There's no way that you can possibly read it. For them to have written something like this, and then for it to be changed and edited and then printed for the whole world to see. I don't know what their expectations were, but they were clearly very, very low. And if they had time again, I'm sure they would not be writing about what is a very disturbing. If you made a film, like everything that's claimed in Deuteronomy, Leviticus, if you made a film out of that, it would be banned.
Oh, hey, if a young virgin's raped, she's got to marry the rapist as long as he pays her father 50 shekels of silver. That's what it's worth.
But what actually just sounds like Oklahoma.
God gets the bad rap for this.
he'd know more than we do about some nuttiness going on in the far right evangelical church. Yeah.
Is that what these days you get away with it? You go and rape someone as long as you got check silver for a dad. It's all good. Don't worry about it.
Oh, it's just it's absurd. The people that try and defend it is anyway. Fenton's back with us again, searching for God's will, because I asked him to elaborate on what it meant to search God's will. Searching for God's will to me meant trying different prayers or strategies to see if God's favor will give me a hint I was doing the right thing. Yeah, I think Rich probably not there. I did the same. Unfortunately, that type of searching never has an end. Absolutely true. Followed up with adding biblical interpretation, and the difference between those cultures and ours makes looking for God's will an incredibly time-consuming process. I'm not sure any part of reading, certainly the Old Testament, gives you any indication about God's will. But what you also said, Jace, really stood out, is that the Bible, I think for the most part, the New Testament is really about teaching us stuff about the character of Jesus. I don't know what you could possibly learn from the Old Testament, other than don't mix your materials when you
no tattoos,
weird
no
stuff,
shellfish,
shellfish,
nothing with a cloven hoof.
What are the lessons of the Old Testament? In other words, take it away, throw it away, burn it, and don't have references to it, and no one would be worse off because of it.
Oh, but there's some lessons in there on how to be saved, Pete. You know, there's a few different ways you can be saved. Apparently, there's about 24 ways you can be saved. Paul, in Galatians and Romans, said it's by faith alone. James states that it's by your works. Acts and Romans say all you've got to do is call on the name of the Lord. Is that right, Rich? I'm thinking the name of the Lord there.
Yeah, you're right.
Matthew says that not everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, though. But he also says that heaven is obtained only by helping the poor and the needy, and without doing those things that one is eternally condemned, which I really like as well. Romans clearly states that salvation is only the result of election and predestination by God, regardless of whatever you do. And there are many more roads to salvation which are documented throughout the Bible. But my question to you, Rich, is it faith? Is it works? Is it calling on the Lord? Is it a combination of all of those thereof? Or is it simply loving Jesus?
A bunch of guys having different opinions. That's what it is.
Yeah, so I love the way you did that, Jace. I couldn't have done it.
Been doing a lot of homework, Rich.
He knows more Bible verses than I do. I think
He's got the King James Bible out. He's on
You've got to know your stuff.
Yeah, he's good. He's good.
I guarantee he's using Google, not the Bible.
College courses I went in. But it illustrates a real danger in the way that a lot of Christians use the Bible. So they've made these decisions. They're like, the Bible has to be this thing. It's an oracle of heaven. It says the same thing all the way through. There's no differences. Only one way it talks about stuff. And when you do that, then you come up with the craziest things because it isn't that. So you have to twist and turn and it's called good, bad, and do all sorts of weird stuff. Or you can start with the Bible as what it is. Like a lot of what Roe's been saying, that's what the Bible is. If it's inspired, I wonder what that means. And you start with what the Bible is and you go from there rather than deciding what it is and then forcing everywhere that it doesn't meet your preconceptions. So it's a mixed bag. It talks about all different stuff. The classic is the fight between Paul and James. Paul was like, faith alone. And James was like, no, you've got to do stuff. And they had a bit of a fight about it. They're not saying the same thing. You can't make them say the same thing without saying some really stupid things along the way to argue it. So, even in the early Christian church, there's a couple of different ways of looking at things. Which means for me if I'm going to call the Bible inspired, it's not a univocal or a single, like a monotone, or a single voiced way of talking about God. There's all these different things. And the clearest things is in the Old Testament. Between like you read stories like Rowie asked, what good is the Old Testament? For me, I am a Christian. I'm the kind of Christian that actually says the Bible's inspired in some sort of error-free way, but in a way that is being used by God to change me. I read the Old Testament. One of the stories that I read recently really blew my mind. So, the Prince of Egypt cartoon, he goes in and Moses brings all the people out of slavery. I never stopped and asked, I wonder how the people of God became slaves. Well, you read the story a bit earlier about Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. His brothers sold him into slavery. He becomes this second in charge of Egypt, and you read the story. He stored up all the food because he had some inside information that there was a drought coming. He stored it all up, and when the people came, he sold it for really, really, exorbitant prices, including to the people of Israel. And they couldn't pay it back, so they became slaves. And then you have, in the midst of that, you have the prophets also coming in and talking about injustice and the poor and the meek and all of that sort of stuff. And you go, oh, there's a couple of different strands in the Bible. There's these stories that are literally empire, the monarchy, the King David's propaganda. How good are we? God, I'm a man after God's own heart, even though I rape Bathsheba and murder his husband, but I'm a man of it's royal propaganda. Then you've got the prophets coming in and saying, actually, you're an evil sinner, you're a murderer, you're a rapist. And you see the same stuff happening today. I'm going to pick on Paul Fenton and his country because it's the most clearest example.
Yeah.
We're a righteous nation. Actually, no, you are an evil empire by the many things that you're going. You can see the prophetic people are saying, we're better than this. We can do better as a nation. And you see these battles and you look in the Old Testament, you go, well, this is what people are about. The Old Testament reveals as much to me who I am and what I could be and who I don't want to be, as much as, even more so than what God really is like. It reveals the heart of people and the darkness in us and the things that we've got to avoid. And I go, okay, that's quite useful. We've got to learn lessons about the darkness of people so we can maybe not repeat the Roman Empire, maybe not repeat the Nazi Germany. Maybe.
But Rich,
get your act together there, man. What's going on? Maybe we can not do that again.
I look at the Bible, and there's a lot of people who talk about the Bible demonstrating the infallibility of God, right? The sheer decision-making process is precise, ordained. We know what's happening. And then I read something like Genesis 6:6, right? Of all of the chapters, of all of the verses, and I'm thinking, this is actually a verse where God admits that he got something wrong, right?
Right?
God himself. So he decides, I'm going to kill all of the pregnant women, all of the babies, all of the toddlers, all of the animals. I'm going to save 8 people, all right? Just 8.
And no
people.
Unicorns.
No unicorns. We forgot all about those. Save the mosquitoes, save the bot flies, all the important ones, all the good stuff. Samuel and Numbers, he then declares that he never changes his mind or repents about anything. And I'm kind of like, how do I bring all of this? How do I synthesize this to get a consistent, internally consistent, congruent story so that I can talk to my kids and go, here's your infallible God, kids?
You can't.
You can't. No, he's right.
You simply can't. And why would you want to? So, Rich, just on what Jace just said there, and I just want to ask a deep question
Ooh.
What is the connection between God and the writers at that particular time? Let's just take what he talked about there.
Yeah, no, that's something I wrestle with. I don't have a solid answer. I knew what I was taught, which was somehow,
Yes.
miraculously, even though these men wrote what they wanted to write, somehow God was in it and through it, so that what was written was actually exactly word for word what he wanted to be written. And then you end up with the problems like Jace pointed out, which is, how can in one part God say, oh yeah, I actually repent of creating these rat
Correct.
bags, I'm going to kill them all and start again, and later on go, I never changed my mind, and then
Control
later on
belief.
going, you know, God is the same today, yesterday, today, and forever. Like you can't make them match. So either you have to do, you know, basically a frontal lobotomy and ignore your actual ability to think and hold on to a preconceived idea of the Bible, or you look at the Bible and you go, this is what it is. Now what do we do with it? And we see very different stories. We see contradicting stories. We see different threads. We see propaganda of the monarchy with, you know, other threads of prophetic voices against the monarchy. We see disagreements in the church. We see all this wrestling. And so I know what it isn't. I know it's not some supernatural superintendence that God somehow got everything written, even though people wanted to write. I think it's more, it's less about the Bible itself. It's more about the community. That's why I think, Rowie, you probably find that atheist Bible scholar of the Old Testament quite fascinating, because it actually means something interesting when you look at the history and the people that were around, and the development that happens all the way through. For me, one of the things that I find illustrative of the way I think about it is, I think the Bible was written by people, full stop.
Yeah.
I think it's also inspired because of the way it acts in the life of a community of faith. And I can only point to my own life. As soon as I started seeing it that way, I get far more challenged about what I could become if I let myself not, lean into love and compassion and caring for others. The kind of monster I could become is written in the pages of the Bible. I go, okay, yeah, I don't want to become a King David. I don't want to be like that.
But you reckon without religion and without the Bible, Rich, that you would be a monster? I mean, I don't see that in you.
I can't tell, but I do know that it's useful. It plays a useful part.
But you're saying essentially that your morality is based around the Bible and not just in empathy.
No, I think there's an interplay of the two, which is interesting. Conceivably, and because I look at people who don't have the same relationship to the church and the Bible as me, and they have a strong moral compass and a goodness about them. And so obviously the conclusion to that is you don't need that to be a good person.
I like a couple.
Maybe I did as the person Richard. Maybe this was what I needed. All I know is that's what I ended up with, and it's been useful.
Yes,
for me. It's been,
and if it makes you a better person, that's fantastic. Yeah.
I mean,
but even one of the founders of the United States, like Thomas Jefferson, right? There's a quote from Thomas Jefferson referring to the God of the Bible. He says, he's a terrible character, cruel, vindictive, capricious, and unjust. And when I look at these people that, they should be respected for what they created and their obviously intellectual prowess. And all the way back then, even they were interpreting the God of the Old Testament.
I think Jefferson was an atheist.
Well, perhaps, but nonetheless, an intellectual.
Yes.
And, somebody that obviously espoused this idea of the separation of church and state, which is so important globally for all of us.
I think so too.
But it kind of demonstrates to me that we all need to actually look at the Bible from a slightly different perspective. And I know for an atheist, I look at it as a historical document more than anything else, which is why I'm challenged. I've mentioned once before, I've got a good mate who is a biblical literalist. And we have so many passionate, ferocious debates. And that's why I do my research, because I need to be able to get on his level.
Yeah, you've got to argue from the inside with them. And it seems like there's so many places it has fatal flaws that you have to either check your brain or change your thinking.
I think the frustrating thing about but the frustrating thing about the Bible, from my perspective, having read it and learned it from a Pentecostal perspective, so you tend to read out and hone in on what you're taught. The relative little segments. You're not, which has actually inspired me tonight for the first time. I'm actually going to go back and read the Bible as an atheist, or I've got to stop using that word. I don't want to call myself an atheist anymore. You don't have to identify not believing in God the same way I don't wake up every morning and go, thank God I don't believe in unicorns anymore.
It's a loaded term, isn't it?
It's a complete, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have the right to be a part of my language.
When I say I'm an atheist, I'm not denying your God.
No, but it's the same as I don't call myself anything to do with any other things I don't believe in.
Mm-hmm.
People say, "Oh, you're an atheist. You deny God." No, I don't. No, as an atheist, I simply don't believe on the evidence that I've been shown. So I won't believe in unicorns. I won't believe in Santa. I won't believe in anything unless I could be proven, shown, and that it's real. And then I will. But until then, I'm open.
For me.
Open to whatever.
It's not something I'm thinking about. It just doesn't figure.
Correct. Yeah.
It's not a disbelief. It's an absence of anything. It just. Yeah. I also don't believe in. Well, I think I've said this once before on this podcast. I don't believe that there's pink rhinoceroses at the bottom of my garden. But that doesn't mean I'm an active disbeliever in pink rhinoceroses at the bottom of my garden. It just, the idea just doesn't exist because I don't need it. It's
correct.
Not there.
It's not a part of your thinking that you revolve around. It's just like, well, if it's not there, it doesn't have the gravity for me to rotate around that it has for your life. Yeah.
And it's one of the things that causes a negative vibe around the world about atheism, is that people think that we're an active group of people who are like-minded. I am the antithesis of that.
Yeah.
If there was an atheist meeting in Perth or whatever, I wouldn't go in a fit because it's ridiculous. We all have different reasons. There's very little we share other than the lack of evidence to believe in there being a God.
And the vast majority of them are a bunch of anyway.
Every single person watching this podcast right now are atheistic to all of the gods that they don't believe in.
That's right. And I got to tell you guys, I have a bigger issue with militant atheists than I do with Christians.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Because they're just wankers. They have no respect.
Even Richard Dawkins is very, very critical and rude to people who don't share his views. Matt Dillahunty, who's probably the most, prolific atheist in the world at the moment, he's a wanker. I'm sorry if you happen to watch this at some stage, mate.
Absolutely.
But he's just rude to people. He's no respect for people that don't believe, and it's just, they just talk over people. They just are abusive and nasty, and good luck to you. Fenton is back.
For us atheists that don't believe, we have a lot of respect for people like Rich. You're special. We'll take care of you, Rich. It's okay.
Oh, thanks, man.
A special place for you. Fenton. The criticism.
Sorry, Church. I actually, that was a joke.
The criticism of the US is more than fair. Yep, it's actually making me understand how cultures back then and in the 1940s Germany could turn on its own people. Look, We ain't seen nothing compared to what Trump is going to do to his own country.
It's coming. That Project 2025 is scary stuff.
Obviously, Germany. But look, we are compared to many countries in the world. The most of them, I think, are not like that. However, we have a very, very dark and checkered history when it comes to our original inhabitants of this country, the oldest civilization on Earth. We have a disgusting, disgraceful, embarrassing, humiliating history when it comes to the treatment of those people and how the British authorities came over here and took our planet, took our country, and turned it into theirs and disregarded the people who lived here. White supremacists. That's what James Cook was, and so was everyone that went with him.
Yeah.
And
is it 60, 70, 80,000 years of their culture?
Yeah,
prior
to us.
Up to 70 and 80,000. Yeah.
I mean, that blows me away. I've heard people on Sky News, which I love to watch from an anthropological point of view.
Yeah.
I've heard people on that station say, "Oh, but they never invented cars. They're clearly animalistic. They're clearly primitive." And I'm like, by what measure does inventing a vehicle make you an advanced society, right? If you've existed for 80,000 years in desert conditions, clearly you're doing something right because you're still around. The Roman Empire, rose and fell in the space of 2,500 years?
Yeah, exactly.
And yet 80,000 years later, the indigenous culture is still there, still around, still thriving.
Mate, you have a look at the list of the things that they did invent. It is extraordinary. Medicine, music, didgeridoos. Who came up with that idea? Farming, burning off bushes to provide more food and more animals. It's just they invented so many things, and the pig ignorant of this world are more than happy to say that they did nothing. There are still
exploiting the white man by doing welcome to country ceremonies and charging them ridiculous amounts of money. They've worked it out.
This is what I find hilarious is these fat, blotched-faced functional alcoholics sit with a microphone and say that as if they're the ones who invented the automobile. Mate,
yeah.
You've done nothing. You've done nothing with your life except hammer on and your racist nonsense. We didn't invent the automobile either. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, there are civilizations they're discovering now in the Amazon that have not advanced one iota past where they have been for God knows how many thousands of years. And that's fine because they have got and done what they need. They have food, they have water, they have farming, they have everything that they possibly need. What are you going to do? Turn around and say they're nothing. They're not important. They're just.
So guys, I want to tell you something which you may or may not believe. I read a paper recently, and it looks to be true. They're saying that the actual source of humans, as we are today, wasn't in fact Africa. Based on the record, the fossil record that they've discovered, it looks like Australia may have been the origin of humanity. And
I'd love if that's true.
Went to Africa. It went that way, not that way. Now, if that's true, that is mind-blowing because that says something about our indigenous population potentially being one of the earliest human civilizations based on the evolution theory. And that's incredible. When I hear racist people go, "Oh, but the Aboriginals are just bloody lucky. It was the British that came in and not the Japanese because they would have wiped them out." I'm like, shut up. Yeah? Because you're just demonstrating that you're a bigot, right? You're kind of saying the inside voice out loud, and that probably shouldn't happen.
I don't know how the argument that, we murdered slightly less than they would have murdered is a good argument. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
This sort of gets me as well is I've got some friends who insist on calling Australia a Christian country because we were founded as a Christian nation. And I'm like,
says who?
So when you look at the founding of our nation, first of all, Cook came in and the disaster of that sort of terra nullius and all of that sort of jazz,
and the disease they brought with them,
disease and just taking the land and taking the resources, and but when the laws were passed, there was a number of laws who actually classified our First Peoples, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, the people who were here, as not human.
That's true. Yes.
These aren't humans. And I'm like, if that's the definition of a Christian nation being founded, I guess I'm not a Christian, because
even slavery, Rich. The fact that slavery was a Christian thing, and it's accepted in the Bible, and it was accepted in even more modern times. If you happen to be for want of a better term, a Black American, because we can't use certain words anymore because they've become emotionally loaded as well. Yeah. But the fact that Christians, good Christian people, would whip a human being who just happened to be a different color. There's a fantastic meme doing the rounds on the internet at the moment showing 3 different colored eggs, and you crack each of them, and the egg inside each of them is exactly the same. And try and demonstrate to racist bigots, and excuse the language, guys, because I'm so passionate about this, that you're a fucking moron if you think that there is a difference between humans based on their skin color. Get over yourself.
It's biblical, mate. It's biblical.
We are all human. We're all in this together. And just deal with it, for God's sake.
Yep.
I get so angry. I'm sorry, guys. I really do. It just works me up so much.
Mate, I have spent most of my life in country towns with Aboriginal population and many, many friends through my life. I've worked in Aboriginal radio. We have Aboriginal people in our family. I have argued with people who are good friends, to most of them are no longer good friends, just based upon this inability to understand the need for recognition. If you ever get a chance to watch Stan Grant, I'm sure you both know who Stan Grant is.
I think I know what you're going to talk about. It's brilliant.
Oh my God. I just had tears. The way he collected the information about his people, he's part of the stolen generation. I grew up, I'm old enough to know, watching ads on TV about, Aboriginal kids being marched off to missions to become better people, and how do we eliminate the black people, and we used to call them half caste and quarter caste. The more black that they were bred out, they became more white. It's like, I remember that stuff firsthand when it came. It was just, back then I used to look at it going, what are they talking about? What is it? I might go to school with Aboriginal people. They're as black can be. And they're my good friends, and they are fascinating people. And I love them, and I've fought for them most of my life. Suresh will know. We've talked about this in the past.
There are people exploiting the system. So all of the goodwill that we have towards Aboriginal people. And then you have people like, and I'm going to use an example here, which is probably quite controversial. Do you remember the name Nigel Mansell?
Who, sorry, you dropped out.
Nigel Mansell was an Aboriginal advocate who considered himself to be Aboriginal. Yep. But in terms of the genetic bloodline, I understand he was something like 1/8 Aboriginal, and yet claimed to have all of the rights and all of the, all of the things that we want to give to Aboriginal people so that they have some level of equity in our society. And yet this was a man with blonde, curly hair who would never be discriminated against. The real issue that we have with our Indigenous population is because they look different, and people treat them differently based on that.
Yep.
And yet we have people who are kind of exploiting the system that we have, where we try to help and assist and provide equity for these people who are being discriminated against. And we have an entire part of the population who could be considered to be white, who are leveraging that system and taking resources away from the people that need the assistance.
Yep.
And that infuriates me just as much.
Yeah, there are people that wrought every system available, don't they? What's really interesting, and I've been talking a bit about this, we're all two halves of a generation. Half of me is Australian, half. So my mum was Australian, her dad was Scottish. I don't ever talk about being the Scottish part. It's just always about I'm a Roe. Half of me is a Christie from Scotland, but I'm never considered that. And people go, you're Aboriginal. Why are you claiming to be Aboriginal? Because it's a great culture to be associated with. How honourable and incredible would it be to be connected to? And I'm so blessed to have people, as I said, in our family with a lot of friends who are Aboriginal people, and it's a fantastic thing. And it's okay for them to consider themselves to be one of two different cultures that they have in their family tree. I mean, that's fine and dandy, but people exploit things no matter what color they are. There's as many, whether they're Aboriginal, whether they're white, it doesn't matter. People will exploit and rip off and cheat the way they do. It's just a part of human nature, unfortunately.
And part of what it also is, and I became aware of this through my studies and research, that really impacted me was even the way that when we try and do the right thing as government, it can actually be quite insulting and damaging. This whole idea of closing the gap. Okay, from our perspective, we sort of go, okay, that's going to be a good thing because there's all these outcomes, but nobody actually stopped to ask the Aboriginal community, because that's what it is. They're a community. They've got their values. They've got their own dreams for their children and themselves, which may not include a high-powered sales job in an ed tech company.
Yep.
So they may not want to close that particular gap, and tying in a whole bunch of funding to what we determined you should want for you and your children is as racist as anything else.
That's what we've done from the beginning.
And it is not about individuals. It's about a community who have dreams and visions and a desire for their future and a way of being in this world and a treasure they get to share with us. And I think, it's fascinating that we shouldn't also, and I know I'm talking to two guys who agree 100%, is not coming in and save these poor savages. It's like, they're an amazing people. They've got their issues as we have our issues.
Of course.
That's not what it's about. We're people doing the best we can. And surely we can look at where there's an abundance of wealth. We can share it around in a way that benefits the people, especially to right some of the wrongs that I benefit. My skin. I walk to a place. I'll tell you this one story that really, really impacted me. Noel Nanup is one of the, I think he's sort of retired from that position, but he was the elder in residence at ECU, and I was there, and I was talking with him personally, and we were talking about the lived experience of an Aboriginal man compared to me. I walk into a store, I can go shop, I can walk out, nothing.
Yep.
He is a respected leader, far more than I am. He is an upright leader of white people and his own people, of a well-respected organization. He was saying, I walked into the shop the other day. I was followed around by the shopkeeper, and women would clutch their purses closer as he walked past them. That's what we're talking about. This is what we've got to understand. It's not about everybody having a fair shot, because I literally walk into a store and I've immediately got a benefit over many of my Aboriginal brothers that walk around.
But Rich, are you literally denying right now that you don't feel the same way? I will openly admit, as focused as I am on the equity of the Indigenous folk, I still feel intimidated, and I don't know why. I can't rationalize it. But if I see a couple of Aboriginal men when I'm in a vulnerable position, I will still feel intimidated. And it's wrong and it's not cognitively sensible, but I still feel it.
What other
Horrifies me.
what other group of people could you feel the same way about if you saw them?
Look, I got to admit, if I saw
Well,
a couple of guys with tattoos on their faces, or a couple of Vietnamese guys that will look vaguely intimidating, I'd probably feel the same way. So maybe it's not an actual racist thing, but maybe it's just a different people thing.
maybe, yeah.
But I'm horrified that I feel it because I want better for me.
Well,
Right?
Jace, we all grew up with 60 Minutes showing story after story of country towns in riot and young Aboriginal men running around beating each other up. It's got to have damaged us deep inside.
Yeah.
You also got to remember
that trauma, I guess.
You also got to remember there's a hell of a reason for them to be angry and to be antisocial.
Yes.
I don't know how they're not burning the system to the ground. I don't know.
Correct.
That's what I would be doing.
But because they're so oppressed, that's why they don't have any.
Absolutely.
They get up and go. Got up and went a long time ago. My son-in-law is from Tiwi Islands, up the coast of Darwin. Same thing. Beautifully dressed, professional man. Goes into a shop, is followed around all the time. He's never stolen anything in his life.
No.
And now there has to be another side to this. That doesn't mean all Aboriginal people are thieves.
Of course.
But a shopkeeper may have worked out over time that most of that kind of crime may have been through Aboriginal people going in there for whatever reason. Now, I want to backpedal on that quickly to say that if we can't even agree on the 26th of January being a date doesn't suit everyone, the very moment that this country was taken over by the English, that was the beginning of the end of Aboriginal people to be able to get anywhere close back to who they were and who they are. There are individuals who have clawed their way back. The vast majority, you've only got to go into every park in Perth and see Aboriginal people under trees abusing alcohol, and they get criticised for that. I know more white people who abuse alcohol than there are Aboriginal people. Once that happened, I have said it all my life, there is no coming back from that.
No.
You cannot come back from having everything that you represent taken away from you. I was listening to a guy on ABC TV the other night about how he can fix our entire problem in Australia about bushfires. And he said, we've been doing this for 80,000 years. We know how to burn. We know how to set fires and control them 100% with no disaster. And not one single white person will listen to us and say, come and teach us. That's the arrogance that took over this country all that time ago. And it still exists now. And before I die, I'm not going to see any changes in the way these people are treated. It is just an absolute disgrace. And every single person who jumps up and down going, what are you doing welcome to country for? I don't need to be welcome to my own country. This is my country. They don't get it. They don't understand.
Pete, I grew up in South Headland. So a lot of my mates as I was growing up were Indigenous folk. And I don't claim to have any connection, but I kind of gelled with a lot of them.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed very early on is the kinship that they have, like a familial kinship. And do you know the story at all of Callacabadi, like the suburb of Perth?
No.
There was a section of Perth that is very near Whiteman Park. So this was a location that had been set up for the Aboriginal population. They built a lot of state housing there.
Yeah.
But I think that was one of the mistakes they made, right? They built housing that was intended for what is culturally Western white people.
That's right.
With no concept whatsoever of what the Aboriginal population with their culture actually needed. And so very rapidly, most of these houses had their doors removed, the windows removed. There'd been fires lit in the main living room. There were windows smashed out. The government took this as a form of vandalism.
Yes.
Instead of recognizing that anthropologically, this was a requirement of a different culture that respected the outdoors, that wanted to have a life that more respected nature. And instead they were given what we use, which is modern day caves with artificial lighting.
Yep.
There was no research done to establish what it was that these people needed. Instead, they were given, handballed Western culture. And then we judged them by that. And that was entirely the wrong approach, because how can we judge a culture that's 80,000 years old by a culture that is effectively in Australia less than 200 years old?
Yeah. They did the same in Pinjarra, where I lived and grew up in Pinjarra. Down the road, they did the same thing, built all this government housing, and they did the same thing. They just burnt everything that was there. That's not, they didn't do it because they were vandals or they didn't care. That's not how they live. Trying to force a square peg into a round hole, and it never worked, and it never will. Let's just jump in before we head off, guys, to Fenton. Have you guys heard of the Flat Earth final experiment in Antarctica? It has split the Flat Earth community, similar to how science affects religion. They move straight to tribalism when debunked. And I've looked quite a lot into this, not this particular final experiment, but how the Flat Earthers believe that there is a wall and no one has ever gone past it. And if they were able to go past it, that would then indicate that the Earth is flat. I don't know what the final.
I think that might be like the 24-hour day. Like that's supposed to be the complete impossible thing. Yeah, everybody's lying about it, and they go, "Okay, well, come to Antarctica," and they stand outside for 24 hours and go, "Okay."
Oh,
yeah. Well, that's undeniable. Like to anybody who's thoughtful in it, I think it's an undeniable evidence. And yeah, you'd think then everybody would just go, well, that's the evidence, let's move it. But I think
it's akin to saying someone take a spirit level. You get someone who takes the spirit level and puts it on the ground and goes, "There's proof the Earth is flat."
Oh, no, I love that. I love that one.
And I'm just like,
the guy that had a globe in front of him of the Earth like this, and he said, "I'm in a plane and I'm flying over the top of the Earth, and I'm the right way up, and then I go all the way. I come underneath, and I'm upside down."
Oh no! Like us in Australia.
Benton, are you leaving this to the last minute to tell us that you're a flat Earth fan, or are you just talking purely about
my hair is standing up? It's because I'm upside down because I'm in Australia. But I've also heard that none of us Australians actually exist. We're all just paid actors.
That's right, and
that's why we're on these things, and you've got a virtual background.
Yeah. So 10 to 10, Australian Western Standard Time is the time right now. We're going to wrap up shortly. We'd love to hear from you. Fenton's been the lone commentator tonight. Good on you, mate. Really appreciate it. Just give us a quick lowdown on this flat Earth thing, mate. Are you a believer or what? I'm just stirring you up a little bit. But if you've got a comment from anything we've been talking about tonight, of course, the actual whole thing tonight was about when religion gets in the way of common sense. If you've got any more questions, it obviously generally branches out into all sorts of different directions, which we have done really well tonight. But jump on quickly on YouTube. Let us know if you've got a final comment. We'll probably wrap it up at 10. We're about 10 minutes to. Is that fair, guys?
Sounds perfect.
Give me a little bit more. Seems we haven't been on air for some time. 2024 was fairly average. Yeah, it was a shocker. And I'm not one of these people that thinks 2025 is necessarily going to be any better because it's a new year, because time is irrelevant when it comes to things like that. It's just another day. But yeah, interesting comments. The Flat Earth final experiment in Antarctica. Well, look, apparently the Flat Earthers, there's all sorts of different underground cities and places and all sorts of weird ass stuff, but I don't subscribe to it, but a lot of people do, so there you go.
Well, interestingly enough, Pete, we talk about ancient history, and I'm talking well before 0 AD. They've started doing satellite scans of Antarctica, and they've discovered that there are civilizations, remnants of civilizations and jungles on the land that is 3 kilometers beneath the ice of Antarctica. So they're saying the Earth must have had a different tilt previously, or like, where did that ice come from?
Who's
but you know
they?
what the scary thing is?
Who's
If all of that 3 kilometers of ice that covers the entirety of Antarctica, which is bigger than the continental USA, if all of that ice slides off that continent, it's going to raise sea levels around the world by 2 to 3 meters.
Yep.
And that's not conspiracy theory. That's
No.
actually real. The Ross Ice Shelf, there's currently a section of that ice that's sliding off, and they're saying that if it goes into the water, it could actually raise ice levels around the world by 30 or 40 centimeters, which doesn't sound like a lot, but places like Florida are already that close to flooding anyway.
Yeah, say goodbye to Mandra.
Is that our history
There's all
as
your geeks on,
humans
Murray.
may go well further back than anything that we've been thinking about.
Yeah.
What if there was humanity before modern history? That is something that rests on my mind all the time, much more than Christianity or any form of thinking about God. What if humans and things like the pyramids and the Sphinx and all that kind of stuff way predates anything about modern humanity?
I can't.
Definitely.
Can you hear me, you guys? You can
Gotcha.
hear me. I can't hear anyone. Of course, we couldn't go tonight without having some mic issues.
Oh, no.
Let me just check.
Oh,
audio.
Rowie.
Well, we can hear.
Yeah,
we can hear
okay,
you just
that's
fine.
not
I can hear him.
Yeah.
I can hear Rowie. I can hear Rich.
Yep. It's just he can't hear us.
I still can't hear you guys.
I can vaguely hear
Let me
some
just
village
do
people
this.
happening just down the road here. I don't know what's going on there. Oh, he's gone.
He's gone. Spat the dummy finally.
Now we can really
Now-
start talking.
Now we can start.
Fenton says, I am fascinated by the phenomenon of the biggest names in flat Earth just a globe, and the reverberations are very interesting.
Mm.
Hang on, let's go back to the one before. Have you got? Oh no, I've already heard that one. Sorry. I'm fascinated by the phenomenon. One of the biggest names in flat Earth just said it's a globe, and the reverberations are very. Who's one of the biggest names in flat Earth? I don't know anyone. I don't follow them that closely, but that's.
I'm yelling really loud. Yes,
Trying to
Fenton.
help you out here, Rowie.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Oh, okay. What are you helping me out with? I was disappeared. I'd gone.
I know. So Fenton's yelling really loud to help you. You know, if you can't hear Jason and I, maybe you can hear Fenton.
I can just hear him. Yeah.
I can hear both of you.
Yeah, that's good.
I think Albany's a bit closer to California.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that is.
Jeranism.
I'm putting it into my perplexity.
Can you hear me? I'm
Google.
Oh, okay. It's
Hey,
a
Siri,
personality.
Jeranism.
He's a flat Earth influencer.
Is that a guy's
No,
name? Is
that's
it Jeranism? That doesn't sound like,
Jaron
a belief system.
Campanella, also known as Jeranism in YouTube. And he's the one who changed his mind after going to Antarctica with that final experiment thing. So, well,
So
good
he
on him.
wasn't a believer, but now he is.
Yeah, he used to be a flat earther. Now he's changed his mind that it's a globe, basically based on his trip to Antarctica.
Well, good on you, Jeranism.
Yeah,
What
but
do
did
you
he
know?
really?
Welcome
Did
to the
he
rest of the
really
world.
believe it was flat Earth? Or was he just kidding?
Who knows?
Mate, I know plenty of people who are just 100% convinced.
No.
Yeah,
Really?
totally.
We should. You know what we should try and tee up is try and get a time, even if we record it, like record and air it later. But Get Fenton on to give us the lowdown on flat Earth belief and the change.
Yeah.
It might be interesting.
Fascinating. Love.
I might
love
reach out
do
to you,
that.
Fenton, see if you're up for a.
Well, can we not set up an audio so we can talk to him live?
Of course
On
we
air.
can.
Yeah,
Send
because
him an
we
invite.
we can bring him in, we can give him the link and he can join if he wants to come and
Oh, let's do it.
the whole hog.
Let's do it.
Fenton.
I want to see if his hair looks like his avatar.
That's mostly why I want him on. But now might be a good episode on flat Earth because that's a real interesting sort of
the whole thing about the podcast is belief.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't the Bible think Earth is?
Sorry,
the Bible basically talks about the Earth being flat, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. That's why there's flat earthers around. Exactly right. But these people unfortunately knew zero about cosmology. They said that when Jesus is about to come back, we're going to see stars falling off, not stars, things falling out of the sky. So they had no idea and understanding about meteorites and stuff. And they've been falling ever since, and there's still no Jesus. I have no.
Yeah,
I can do that.
Looks like he's going to be keen on. We should reach out maybe in the next couple of weeks.
Let's do it next Wednesday, if we can. Let's do it straight away.
And Fenton, if you don't look like your cartoon character, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Well, we do realise we won't necessarily see what he looks like. Oh, you're going to have him on screen.
Yeah.
Well, okay, mate. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to privately go into just go into Facebook and put in Peter Rowe, ROWE, that's my name. And then we can connect. I'll friend you and you can send me a private message with your contact details and we can organize that you come in, not come in, but just all you need to do is just have a laptop or a mobile or whatever and a microphone. It's a simple Zoom kind of setup. We'll send you the link. You click on that. You just enter it. It's very simple and basic setup. And even though we manage to stuff it up pretty much every week.
Every week.
there's always one of us. That's why I'm wearing the orange cap tonight to try and remain slightly inconspicuous, but I don't think it's worked. So look, that would be awesome. So we'll talk about when we want to have you on, and we can talk about that when we get off air tonight, and then let you know. Just say, look, you come on board. I reckon it's a well and truly a whole segment on talking about flat earthers. It is absolutely fantastic. If you have somebody else that you respect and admire who is an ardent flat earther, please feel free to share the link with them, and they can jump on as well, and we can have a right old time. You know, just get away from this God and Jesus rubbish for a little while and talk about talk about something interesting. That would be cool. Yeah.
Finally, I'll be one of the atheists then. Yes.
Oh no! Hang on.
Whoa. So are you cool? Are you cool, Fenton, with just jumping onto Facebook and just putting in me? If it doesn't come up with me, just with Peter Rowe, just put superstar after it, and it will come up straight away. You know, I'm pretty well known in this town. I'm a bit of a celebrity, so you know.
Oh.
If you're talking about grades, you have to go down several grades, but he's in the
mix. Imagine you're on the top rung of a 20-foot ladder.
Yeah.
Come down to the last step before you touch the ground.
He's an M grade celebrity. That's Mandura.
Hey, but that's
still
pretty cool. That's
with
still
pretty
cool.
With all due respect. You know, we had a pretty big band in the 70s and 80s in Perth.
Yeah, no, that is actually true. Yeah.
And
he had the biggest hair in Perth.
I had the biggest hair. I still have in a drawer, in a drawer somewhere. Here you go. Here we go. I've done this before. This is a new one.
Oh, look at that.
Second from the left.
He kept the hairspray business in business.
That is, yeah. The secret is out.
He was Todd Johnson before Todd Johnson.
It really is, yeah.
Hush your mouth. Hush your mouth. I taught Todd everything he knows.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, look, that'd be absolutely very topical and fascinating. I can't wait to do that. It'd be really good if we have Luke. Luke's back on the 21st. He's not going to be here for that one. because next Wednesday is the 15th. So unfortunately, Luke won't be a part of us. It'd be good if Suresh could be on board with Fenton.
I may not be here next week.
You're going to the Flat Earth
No
Convention.
loss. Yeah.
Well, we need to find. We need to find. Well, that's good. If Luke's not here and you're not here, and Suresh often is a busy man, obviously, then it could be good to have Fenton and somebody else. We just talk about flat Earth stuff that all night. I'm fascinated. I love this stuff. I watch it all the time. There's an incredible woman in New Zealand. This guy goes out to talk to. She's quite happy to look up at the sun and just stare at it forever because it's not there's no such thing as the sun.
These are those breatharians.
Yes.
The ones that believe they can get nutrition by looking at the sun. And I read something further about the fact that, and block your ears if you're not into biological descriptions, but they get naked and they expose their nether regions to the sun because apparently that also re-energizes them, Rowie.
Right.
When I say their nether regions, I mean well and truly their nether regions.
I tried that. Two things happened. I got sunburnt and arrested. It didn't. It's not a good idea.
You're not supposed to do that at Bunnings, Rowie.
Well, now's a good time to tell me. I heard them mention something about a sausage, and I was there. Fenton saying Behind the Curve is a great documentary to watch. I'm going to write that down.
That's true.
Behind the Curve. Are you talking about my muscles again, or Behind the Curve? Brilliant. No, looking forward to that. That is going to be awesome, mate. Contact me. Bunnings is like your home depot. Yeah, correct. That's right. Yeah. All right. Shall we wrap it up, guys? Or
I reckon it was great. Really good chatting again.
Bit of fascinating night. Interesting that the last one we had, which I did an hour and a half by myself, ended up with the most amount of people watching the podcast ever. Now, I'm not saying anything because of that.
Yeah.
Just devastating the good looks, Pete. That's all it was.
I don't know what the hell it was.
It was like one of those car accidents. They just couldn't look away.
That's true.
Talking bullshit for an hour. What can I tell you?
But how do you think the Flat Earthers did so well?
Yeah. That's right. What was interesting is one of the people that came back after us being away for so long. It was incredible amount of people, and they just stuck around because I was so engaging. So,
that's the only explanation. That's the only plausible one.
Yeah, little golf clap. That's all you got.
Yeah, that was poor. Fenton, thank you so much for joining us tonight, mate. It's been absolutely wonderful as always. And of course, we'll be back next Wednesday. What did I say the date was going to be? I can never remember. It is the
15th.
It is the 15th next week. An atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. Of course, if you missed any of it and you've just joined us tonight, you can catch it on YouTube. You can find the replay on there. Tonight, we were talking about interesting things, all about when religion gets in the way of common sense. If you've got any ideas, subject matter that you'd like us to talk about, that you find that you'd find it would be interesting discussion, please let us know. Feel free to do that. Actually, how do people find us when they're not on here to send information through? Facebook? We're still on Facebook. We've got our own page.
They can find us on Facebook, but even commenting on any of the videos we see. So even if it's just commenting on this video, if you're watching it, we can pick up the suggestions there as well.
And if you jump into YouTube and put in an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar, there are shorts, tons and tons and tons of shorts, little bits and pieces over the last 12 months, which hopefully you'll find interesting. Thank you so much, all of you wonderful people out there who didn't participate as far as questions and remarks go, but we know you're out there. Thank you. Thanks, Jace. Thanks, Rich. Hopefully, Suresh back next week, and with Fenton talking exclusively to us on this podcast. The flatliners. So get ready. If you're a flatliner, well, I would love to hear your arguments and proof I think it's probably easier to prove God's existence than it is that the earth is flat. That's controversial.
Whew.
Oh, he's going hard tonight.
And I leave.
It's out.
The secret's out.
We're showing the things that we love.
Look, there's even a CD. Oh, you may laugh, as I'm sure you will. Thanks, guys. Love you.
All right. Awesome.
We'll get
See you
next
guys.
week. Thank you, Run.
Oh, he's gone before the rest of us.